Susan is a senior software engineer currently based in Toronto, Canada. She hosts Rewire with Susan, a tech podcast for newbie developers to learn about topics in software development and building a career in tech. She also mentors software engineers in web development and non-technical managers on technical teams on software development processes. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Susan. And also, it looks like I stopped seeing your slides, so I'll hang on until you get that set up again.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna reshare. And you should see it now.
Perfect. Yep.
So much for joining us back on stage.
Sorry about that. I had the main stage open still. All right, you're all set, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hey guys, welcome to my talk. My name is Susan Daniel-Kareem, as Mackenzie already introduced me. And how many of us are excited about this talk? I'd like to see your responses in the comments if you don't mind. And I just thought about it again, and I'm like, I figured most of us here are probably introverts, chief of which I am. So they will probably not exactly be showing our excitement out loud, and that's okay. We're going to get through this together. Okay, so a little bit more about myself. I'm Nigerian. I'm based in Canada, but currently in Rwanda. I'm a senior software engineer at Guestlogix. I've been in tech for about 7 years now. Besides coding, I enjoy creating content that simplifies tech topics and sharing career advice. I have a podcast where I do this. It's rewildsusan.com and YouTube as well. And yeah, so let's get right into it. Why is my topic focused on introverted engineers? First of all, statistics has shown that 1/3 to half of people you know are introverts. And bringing it closer to home, a recent survey also shows that 70 to 90% of programmers are introverted. Introverted software engineers are often misunderstood, seen to be indifferent, pompous, maybe a little rude, and it could lead to them being passed up for promotion in their careers. And this is usually because introverts are usually more into themselves and could be misunderstood. These perceptions could in turn affect their career progression. Also, people just don't always know the best ways to deal with introverts within the team. And due to this, some people may not be as engaging or even end up leaving their companies because they are unable to connect to the other engineers on their team. Other reasons are that it would help us to look into some of the ways. It will help us look into some of the ways to improve our communication techniques while being comfortable being introverted. It's also important to be able to identify strengths of, having diversity in personalities and balancing personalities on a team. And even when there is an imbalance in personalities, being able to manage such teams. Also, the purpose of this is to create some sort of awareness for organizations, and we come to a place where big businesses are being able to be encouraged to be inclusive of multiple or introverted personalities and provide a healthy environment for introverts as well. So these are just a few examples that depict how an introvert might behave. On the first side, you can see this is the typical me. You're in a good mood, and when to go out, you decided to hang out with your friends, and when the day comes and you actually have to go, the mood is you on the right. And the second is basically someone showing up at your doorstep without letting you know ahead of time. The third is introverts when the elevator door closes before anyone else can get on. And yeah, these are just like typical ways that the introverts might respond based on whatever scenario they find themselves. Now, let's talk about some of the great things about introverts. both personalities, extroverts and introverts, have their strengths and their weaknesses. But it's important to be able to know what areas we're strong at, to be able to, know where we're better placed and what space to find ourselves. So one of the great things about introverts are that we have a strong sense of self, right? Most introverts are pretty self-aware. They know the best conditions to be in. They know the people they should be hanging out with when they decide to hang out. And they also know when they need to recharge their batteries. Also, their sense of imagination is heightened because they think a bit more deeply. They have a knack for listening. You would find that an introvert listens more than they speak. And you could be talking to an introvert and you're like, say something, say something. They also have deep thinking skills, and you'll find that many introverts think more deeply and critically. You would find that an introvert is more likely to stay home and watch Netflix and hang out with friends. Hanging out with folks on TV is as social as they can get at that point. And you would also find that an introvert is more likely to be anxious or not anxious, actually, on an island alone, because technically there is more alone time. Yay. Okay, so let's talk about what really makes an introvert. The major things that distinguish an introvert from an extrovert is their source of stimulation. The introvert is more often than not internally stimulated, meaning they are more energized when they're hanging out alone, reading a book, working alone, thinking, or just coding as it applies to us as software engineers. They may communicate better in one-on-ones instead of company-wide meetings. They are deep thinkers over small talk makers. While the extrovert is externally stimulated, they will get drained and bored being alone. They're likely to jump on a topic before you even ask for their responses. There is no difficulty speaking the first thing that comes to their mind. And they thrive more physically or, when emotionally connected or physically or connected to other people. Uh, and in Susan Cain's words in her book Quiet, introverts are antisocial. Sorry, introverts are not antisocial, but just selectively social. Okay, so we're going to look into some of the causes of these personality differences, and then we can go into how this applies to us in our field of software engineering. So first of all, a scientific study has shown that quite a number of things regarding the reasons behind the differences in personalities tied to how the brain works, how the blood flow in the brain works. And one is that for the introverts, there's more blood flow in the brain for memory, planning, and problem solving. Whereas for the extroverts, there is more blood flow for processing sensory data. Secondly, the introverts require less stimulation to get to that pleasant state of mind or avoiding boredom. This means that an introvert won't easily get bored because they will find a way to occupy themselves and enjoy their own company. While extroverts need more stimulation, and that's why they tend to get bored easily. Thirdly, for the introvert, there is lower sensitivity in how the brain experiences reward or praise. So, like when you get praised for your work or an achievement, the extrovert has a higher sensitivity to this kind of feeling than the introvert. Okay, and this is one key point to note. The personalities are not, an all or nothing stamp, on who you are. For example, there are different types of introverts. We have those that think deeply before they act. We have those that, feel a little bit awkward in social gatherings. And you have those that spend more time alone. These are just a few of the, things that characterizes an introvert. So you could have an introvert that loves to spend more time alone, but doesn't feel awkward at happy hours. And you could also have an introvert who experiences both. It is also possible to be more or less introverted over time as a result of changes in your life. So, for example, Andrea could have been deeply introverted last year, but this year she has more friends, has met more people, She has gotten involved in more stuff, and she is no longer as introverted as she used to be. And the reverse could also be the case. And this is perfectly okay. Now, let's bring this home to software development. We've analyzed why we behave the way we do as introverts and what our strengths are. Let's now discuss how communication, either as an introvert or as an extrovert, impacts us as engineers. Software development is not just about talking to APIs, connecting clients to servers, fixing those annoying bugs, and deploying those apps. They are fundamental areas, but when it comes to actually building a successful, and releasing a product successfully, and even growth within a team, there are collaborative aspects of the journey that are important. So, working with product managers, product owners, daily stand ups, designers, communicating implication of technical decisions to non technical stakeholders are just a few of the reasons why it is important. And I will be talking about a couple of reasons why, communication is important within our teams. First of all, one key thing to look at is collaboration. For successful projects, as I've mentioned earlier, you need your QA team, you need your design team, the engineering team has to be on board, data management as well. They need to be constantly in sync so that there is proper alignment towards the business goals. Another thing is defects and errors. Effective communication improves and makes sure that defects and errors are reduced. And what I mean by that is this: when there is proper communication among teams, software engineers and other members are able to have conversations on the product, on the architecture, on the design, on other factors that impact the output. And due to this, they can tell when something is out of place. So, be it through human or automated testing, if a bug creeps in or a feature doesn't match specifications, we can spot it. And of course, we might not spot all the bugs before they make it to production, but we can reduce them, right? Also, another key thing is conflict resolution. All software engineers may not think the same way, and that's okay. In fact, that's great, actually. We don't always share the same thoughts and ideologies about technical directions, and that's because we've come from different places, we've been exposed to different, technologies and tools and how to use them. But the great thing is that when we are good communicators, we can have healthy conflicts and communicate our thoughts and opinions while being respectful to the other party. As engineers, being able to develop, communication skills help you to objectively evaluate, those decisions. Another thing is open-mindedness and innovative ideas. And basically, this means that different members of the team are able to see many different perspectives when people are talking, when people are having conversations. No one knows it all, and there is always something new to learn. So no matter how little this could result into innovative ideas and open up areas that we had not even thought about. Finally, mentorship. Communication, it creates avenues for mentorship, and I personally believe that pair programming is one great way to be mentored and to mentor. So spaces like pair programming, one-on-ones, and other spaces or communication spaces like that, give rise to the opportunity to bounce off ideas of one another and learn from the wealth of knowledge of other people. And it also helps to mentor and be mentored. All right. So at this point, I'll ask if there are any questions before I go on. Or I'll probably just wait till the end of the talk, if that's okay. All right, so let's talk about diversity of personalities. I mentioned at the beginning of the talk how, the value of this talk is to, share the value that comes from a diversity of personalities. And as much as communication is important, the fact is that it comes easier to some people than others. So being introverted or extroverted comes, of course, with its sets of strengths and weaknesses. And I personally believe that in, bringing about a diversity of personalities, organizations have a need to identify this and begin to focus on creating a space that or where people don't feel unheard because they're introverts. And it would also add a lot of value when businesses begin to create avenues to put all those skill sets of an introvert that may not be the loudest but has a huge contribution to the team on display. So I'll give an example. My company does this thing where if a person or a group of people have one way or the other supported your work, you get to give them a shout out, during company wide meetings. And I think this is a good idea because it gives the opportunity to recognize someone who may not necessarily make a lot of noise about their work on the team. So the bottom line here is that a balance of both personalities is necessary. Imagine a situation where we had only introverts in a meeting, especially right now where, we're in the remote space and most times we have all our videos off. It might be super awkward because you might witness things like long pauses, no sudden responses to ideas, and because people are critically thinking about it. And again, I'm not saying that the reason for long pauses in meetings or, awkward silences is because people are thinking about it. I mean, people could be doing other things, but I digress. I'm just saying here that when you have introverts in a team, there's a high possibility that you have those pauses because people are taking time to reflect about what you've said. So again, I have to reemphasize that balance is everything. And even when there happens to be an imbalance, knowing how to manage that is important. Okay. So let's talk about some of the ways to improve communication while being an introvert. And the reason for sharing this is because, many introverts sometimes find themselves being forced to take on a different personality so that they are not seen as awkward. And sometimes it could come across as inauthentic. And I strongly believe that you can be introverted and still communicate effectively without compromising on what makes you special or be someone you're not. I I talked about this on my podcast and I mentioned how there's a possibility that, an extrovert decides to crack a joke about something on the team. And because it just comes naturally for them, it's the joke goes well. And then you as an introvert, you're trying to, do that same thing and you're hearing cricket sounds. Not because the joke was off, but just because it doesn't come naturally to you. And what I'm saying here, what I'm trying to pass across here is that there are ways to communicate effectively while being comfortable as an introvert, while not having to force a different personality on yourself. So the first thing I would like to emphasize on is mindful listening mindfully. And this means that, you know, you should, as much as possible, try to listen without judgment or criticism, as a lot of us, might be tempted to do when you're listening to something and from the first line, you don't agree with what the person is saying, right? And in addition to this, it also means, not being a passive listener. And one way to do this is trying to rephrase what the person is saying, trying to repeat your words, repeat what the person has said in your own words, and it communicates to the person that you were paying attention. And we are in the world of virtual meetings right now, as I mentioned earlier. So this could also mean trying to stay undistracted while on calls to fully grasp what's being said and be able to, have valuable and tangible additions to whatever is being said or contribution. Secondly, being concise. And this is really important. As engineers, it is pretty easy for us to get caught up in the details when communicating our ideas and solutions. And sometimes we could get stuck on the tree instead of showing the forest. An example is you're trying to communicate how you improve performance or the performance of an application at work. And instead of, highlighting what the problem was, how you fix the problem, and the impact this fix has on the team, you have a tendency to be, focused on the actual fix. And this is not bad because as engineers, obviously, the actual fix is what is the most valuable to us because that's what we spend most of our time doing. But one way to be concise is to, as much as possible, and this is something I do as well, because I know sometimes I have a lot of thoughts in my head, and when I'm communicating them, if I do not have them properly arranged, I tend to muddle them up, excuse me, is that I try to write down my thoughts, right? Write down my thoughts beforehand and create a flow between my thoughts. And this helps me to keep what I'm saying brief and straight to the point. And it also helps me to make sure that I capture all the places, or at least almost all the places that affect everybody that I'm having that communication with. Also, public speaking. Embracing public speaking is the next thing I'll talk about. And I know a lot of people are going, that's not me. Please, I'm ending this. I'm ending this session right now. But as someone that is introverted myself, I'll be honest when I tell you that public speaking helps communication come a bit more naturally. And take it from me, I started a podcast in 2020 and now I have a YouTube channel. And I never thought that would be me, but here we are. So what I'm saying here is that sometimes getting involved in things that help you to talk more or speak more, things like speaking at events, things like presenting during demos at work, not only builds your confidence, but it also improves your speaking skills. And finally, knowing your audience. And this is very important to note when passing your message. For example, as an engineer, the way I would communicate details about a bug to my non-tech manager should be slightly different from how I'll do so with another engineer on my team. So with one, I can go in depth, using technical vocabulary, while I have to be a bit considerate of the other person. Okay. So finally, I will talk about how organizations. Okay, before I go into that, I want to reemphasize this. Let's remember that there is nothing wrong in being introverted, and that's the first thing I'm going to communicate here. And the point of this is to feel comfortable being introverted and still be able to communicate effectively, because communication is a skill that can be learned. Okay, and I'll talk about how organizations can support introverts and tap into their strengths. So, of course, I've mentioned how introverts can improve on their communication, and this is not relegating, what I'm about to say here is not relegating the responsibility to organizations and businesses, but just, communicating or letting us know how organizations can be involved in, tapping into the strengths of introverts, in making their organizations inclusive for introverts, and making them, a part of the group as well. So I'll encourage members, technical leaders, and even extroverts listening to me right now, to take note of this. One of the things not to be scared of is silence. Sometimes you may not get certain responses to your ideas because, like I mentioned earlier, introverts are not likely to say the first thing that comes to mind. So sometimes awkward silences and long pauses should be normalized. And of course, I'm not saying that we should normalize having 1 hour of an awkward silences, right? But what I'm passing across here is that it shouldn't be so weird when there is awkward silence in some of our meetings, just because you have a mixed group. You could have a group of extroverts and introverts, and some people might just be thinking, about what you just shared with them. Like I mentioned earlier, the way that extroverts and introverts process data is quite different, and there should be some allowance for that. Okay, secondly, allocate time to think, prepare, or plan. And like I mentioned earlier, the extrovert may not, the way we process data is different. One, the extrovert may not overthink things, and they are quick to share their thoughts about an idea, even though it might not be properly thought through. And of course, this is not saying that extroverts don't think everything through. But what I'm just saying here is that it comes easier to them to say the first thing that comes to their mind. And sometimes it's not even a bad thing, right? Because sometimes we need to get conversations going as a result of having that skill, right? And it's great having conversations going. It may be a good idea when it comes to the introvert to give a heads up on ideas that you need feedback on, so that gives enough time for the introvert to think ahead of time, and prepare, give you feedback on what you have presented. Secondly, having quality one-on-ones. And I think this is very important because a lot of time introverts tend to be more open, so to speak, in more private spaces, right? So when we have things like the private meetings, the one-on-ones, it's a good opportunity to find out their thoughts on initiatives, on directions, on decisions being taken, asking questions, asking for feedback. Again, this isn't relegating the responsibility from introverts, of proactively communicating. This is just presenting different ways to be inclusive of the introvert's personality type. Thirdly, listening. And it's a bit hard for me to say this, but this happens a lot. An introvert brings up an idea or a question, and because it's not presented with the best choice of words or not spoken with a lot of confidence, an extrovert could revamp the same idea with better wording and they get the praise for it. So it's also good, when people are actually listening better to the introverts, when they're asking clarifying questions when they're not sure. Doing this, besides getting to know what the introvert is actually thinking, also leaves room for open-ended questions. It leaves room for more thoughts and it leaves room for more ideas as well. And finally, asking for feedback. Sometimes you wouldn't get what you don't ask for. And you'll notice that even on social media, for example, when people post stuff and they want people to take action on whatever they've posted, they actually literally put it there. Hey, follow for this or share this and do this. Because naturally, people aren't going to do that if you don't tell them to do that. So sometimes it's important to actually ask for the feedback. Sometimes people respond to things when they are nudged for it, right? So in getting the best or getting the best value, sometimes it's important to ask. Another thing I'll mention, as a reason why it's important to ask is because sometimes introverts they tend to overthink things, right? So you're presented with this, or you're presenting this idea you have, or this solution you have. The introvert is very much more likely to overthink that idea. So even if they have the solution or they have an idea of the solution or suggestions or ways to improve that idea you've just brought up, they would most likely spend more time overthinking it. And if you probably don't ask for their feedback, they will just keep overthinking it without actually talking about it. So that's another reason why asking for feedback is necessary. Okay, so in conclusion, I have the major things letting you guys know and sharing with you guys is that there is value in having a balance of personalities on a team. And even when there is no balance, it's important to know how to manage a team, with more or less introverts. Also, you can be introverted and communicate effectively because communication is a skill that can be learned. And that is all I have for you guys. Thank you for listening to this chat, and you can connect with me, on the different platforms that I listed on the slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was great. There's a lot of interaction in the chat. I don't think that we have many questions yet, but if any of you that are watching have questions for Susan, please drop them in the chat. But a lot of just like great feedback and people who really resonate with what you addressed during this presentation. I definitely can resonate.
That's so good to hear. Oh, I'm super excited to hear from you guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. Yeah. And thanks for providing all of the ways to contact you too, in case there's any questions like after the event, if people are thinking about your presentation after the fact. We'll also be uploading all of the recordings to YouTube, so you can also revisit this presentation as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Someone asked, do you have any resources that you use to overcome this?
Right. Resources. So for me, I would say the way that I overcome speaking or being as an introvert communicating effectively is to do more of it, to be honest, right? Because there is the tendency to want to, for example, when it comes to possibly presenting demos at work or, presenting any form of presentation, right? Sometimes my manager is asking like, who wants to do this? And initially I'm like, no, that's not me. I'm not going to do that. But now, because I know that it's helpful to me, I, volunteer. I try as much as possible to be in that space where, I can, talk more, communicate more. And also reading helps. For me, also listening to podcasts helps a lot, helps to be able to structure my thoughts, helps to understand how people receive what I'm saying, not just what's all up in my head, but also how people receive it, the right way to structure my words, things like that. Those are, the things that help me.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm seeing some questions here.
Mm-hmm. So the next one is, how do you handle things like when coworkers want to go out to drinks or some other social activity and you just want to go home?
Yeah, this happens a lot. Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, when you feel up to when as much as possible, being or improving communication is also you not getting lost, losing yourself. So in areas where maybe there are spaces where you have to hang out and things like that, sometimes you you go for it, and when you don't feel up to it, I think as much as possible is presenting your authentic self, right, as opposed to just forcing yourself to be somewhere that you don't want to be. And one way to also, the flip side to it is, one way to also be in that space where it comes naturally is if you go for it. So if you go for one, you go for two, you meet other introverts like yourself there, you guys can have like this kind of bond where, okay, you're able to maybe go more often as opposed to when you're not going at all. So that's how I would probably handle it. But to be honest, as much as possible, I don't really do stuff like that, except when I have maybe friends that are, available to do such, then it's like, oh, let's all hang out together. We're in the same shoes.
Yeah, definitely pushing yourself out of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
So the next question that we have is, what is the best way to learn about effective communication?
That's a good question. The best way to learn about effective communication is by communicating, I would say. By communicating. Like, there's no way to be better at doing anything than actually doing it, right? So communication in whatever form that might be. And of course, it's important to also note that communication is also not only in speaking formats, right? There's the non-verbal communication as well. So one of the ways to be able to be better at that, is actually, discovering more ways to improve on it, right? Reading books, watching videos, watching interviews. I think those are really helpful as well. Saying how, people, communicate ideas. And one thing I also didn't mention in my talk is that there are times that you might not have the answers to some questions immediately they're asked. Maybe you're in a meeting and you get asked a question. It's okay to ask for time, right? Ask for time to go think about it so that you can give a more wholesome response to such answers and you're not caught unawares. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's great advice. And so Tiffany also has a great question. Any advice on networking? I noticed that even though this networking is digital, I get extremely tired after just 2 or 3 interactions, same. And they are amazing interactions and I just need to recharge after. Any advice on how to overcome that to get the best out of these type of events?
Okay, so one thing that I think would help with this is, I mentioned earlier that introverts are self-aware. And I think that one thing that would help is knowing those times where your batteries are charged, right? And making your networking around those times, right? So it's not, because I saw recently a meme where someone, or I think it was a TikTok video where someone was talking about how they start talking and they're excited, but 3 minutes in or 4 minutes in, their social batteries are drained. And it's like, if you're self-aware enough to know those times that your social batteries are at its peak, then those are the times that you should probably consider, having those interactions. So you're at your best, when having them. So yeah, that would be my thoughts about that.
That's great advice. I think also just setting boundaries too, with yourself and with your coworkers. So
yeah.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? Will the slides be posted? Susan, would you like to share your slide link with us and then we can add it?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure. We'll do that right now.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks everyone for interacting in the chat. I've loved reading through all of your insights and your feedback on Susan's presentation.
Okay, so I'm just gonna post it in the chat, and thank you everyone as well for listening. I really appreciate the questions as well. Thank you so much, and the feedback. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And we'll also add the slides to the description of the YouTube video once that's published sometime in June. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you again, Susan. You did amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Mackenzie. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.